furies of language and thought, which moves faster than the wind, he has tamed and made rational. The miracle of man's speech is odd in its own way, because it's a slight departure from the sense and reality that we've had in the play up till then. It's one.
Yeah, just a little feedback of a more general nature on the discussion boards. In general, the answers/responses, which are the things that are due every Tuesday by 5 p.m., earning 4s are going to be the ones that are thoughtful as opposed to knee-jerk. You know, they suggest some sort of meditation on the question and not just kind of rapid fire kind of reaction to get the assignment done. They will also be argumentative. They'll argue something. They'll make claims. They'll be detailed. They'll offer evidence in support of their claims, and they'll be well documented in the sense that they'll quote, right, when they possibly can. And they'll certainly, I mean, this is part of being detailed and offering that evidence in support of the claims that you make, is to quote when you can, quote from the text, the literary text. Don't quote too much, don't quote more than you can handle in your explanatory and analytical moments, right? Well, many of you earned 4s this week, okay? Lots of 4s this week, which just makes me happy, right? Others earned 3s. Don't feel that, oh, I'm a failure, I got a 3. No, you just got 3 this week, right? And you can, you have more to go on, I think, as time goes on here, and we have examples that are probably pretty obvious. Some items that, that are there that you look at and you say, hey, that's good. I'm going to do something more like that next time. Okay? So learn from each other. Let me mention there were very few who participated. There's some who didn't participate, but there are very few who did participate who received fewer than 3 points. Okay? So my most general bit of advice is that middle sentence. 3 words, keep it up, right? Now, read the comments. With regard to the comments due every Thursday by 5 p.m., it's now 1:30 in the afternoon on Thursday, okay? And what I've noticed is that most people have already offered comments, so I don't know, I might actually change the timing for the second part of the discussion boards. I may actually change that to noon on Thursday. I was thinking about making it midnight on Wednesday. I may end up querying you guys about that because I want it to be something that works in your schedules. And I can imagine that a lot of professors are hitting you with things due early in the week because everybody likes to have the end of the week open to do, all the professors, they like to have the end of the week open to do their research, right? And I don't want to, I want to be mindful of that. Okay, so let's make sure we're not just kind of front loading everything to a kind of degree that it collapses, your early weeks. So we'll see. Maybe we'll keep it at Thursday by 5. But I like to have you will, we'll get into this routine. We're already in the routine, right? It's just, I guess it's not a routine yet because it hasn't happened a second time. But I'm going to be giving you a video like this every week, and it's going to be directed towards the discussion boards and whatever issues might arise that maybe we didn't get to on the discussion boards or whatnot. It would be nice to have the comments done by you before I actually make up this video. Now, that's not going to happen this week. It may not happen going forward, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world if it works that way. If I don't respond to your comments, there's still 3 or 4 hours left after I've made up the video, which is directed towards, the discussion boards, but there's still a little overlap there. You can always bring it up the following week, right? So just there's that. Now there's also this other thing. Just what do you do for the, for the comments as opposed to the answers responses? The answers responses due every Tuesday at 5. The comments due every Thursday at 5. Okay. Do exactly what you do. You see what I'm writing down here is a bit of evidence or a bit of direction. Okay. Try to do exactly what you do on the answers responses, just at less length. And of course, what you're doing is directed at the comments, or rather the answer, or answer/response of one of your fellow students, right? As opposed to my question, you're actually commenting on an answer to my question. Okay, and that's the difference. That doesn't mean you don't go back to the book, right? Go back to the book, quote in support of your claim. Don't stick with the evidence. You might want to quote evidence. I use the word against. That sounds more hostile than, in helpful constructive engagement. How about that? With your fellow students, right? You're commenting on a fellow student's answer response and you're quoting in support as a means of, in fact, being even more helpful, right? By bringing some new evidence into the discussion that maybe is missed by your fellow student who has offered an answer and a response. So what does this mean? Well, argue, quote, and analyze even as you address one another's arguments. I mean, that's the upshot, right? I noticed that some offered several comments, by the way, and some of the extra comments beyond the first comment were kind of thin, right? It was like a one-sentence comment that some of you made, which was really pretty appreciative. Hey, that is fabulous. There's no problem with that. I like that, and it shows you're all reading each other. You got excited. You liked what you heard, what you read, and you'd already offered another official kind of comment, right? That was argumentative. And so by no means am I saying only offer one comment and it better be argumentative. What I'm saying is do exactly what you did this week, where there was this spontaneous conversation going on. It was just really wonderful. So we're going to see in the next plate here, where I'm going to kind of celebrate what I saw as just a lot of engagement you had, not just with the text, but with each other, okay? So that's absolutely fabulous, and the last thing I want to do is discourage that. I mean, this is our discussion, right? We're having discussions, and they have to be done on a discussion board, online. So I don't want to shut that down. Just make sure, there's just this minimal rule, that at least one of the comments that you write, as I said a moment ago, looks a little bit like an answer response, but it's just not a full paragraph. It's more like about 3 sentences or so. And it can, by the way, I'm aware of this, that sometimes you're just so excited about what somebody said and it prompts something from you and it ends up looking a lot like a answer/response. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be just 3 sentences, but I wanted this to be manageable given your workload, because we're going to have other stuff due here before too long. That's going to maybe make it a little less like this week we just went through. Okay, we're going to have certain weeks like this week where it's pretty much just reading the stuff and then you sit down and do the discussion questions, right? But we're going to have weeks where you can have something else do, right? Like the squib. And I'm still putting together I've got to put together, but there are a couple little things I still want to decide when I want to ask them of you. It has to do with the schedule, okay? And what's going to be happening in November, for example, with respect to the library. So I don't quite want to hand out the schedule or post the schedule yet. But you can have little things due, as you know, at certain dates. And you will find out about that soon. I mean, you need to know for example, when your squib is due, right? You need to know that, and very soon, so you will find out. Anyway, there it is. There's the general feedback, and I'm going to give you some more specific feedback on one particular discussion board question or item and your fabulous answers/responses. That's the next plate. So 200, week 1, Q3, question 3. As you will see, I would like to just say a few words about it in detail and put together what I thought was a very wonderful conversation that you were having between yourselves. Jill, in her second entry, definitely quotes Levinson as she notes what makes Glaspell's play an exemplary work of the humanities. Its subject is not frivolous, luxurious, that's a term used by Levinson, but that of, quote, the conditions of human thriving. What are the conditions we need in order to thrive? The play is all about what causes a failure to thrive. A pretty good definition of Minnie's married condition, don't you think? She's been kind of depressed, down in the dumps, right? Long before the action that is represented in the play, or represented as just having happened in the play. The play asks important questions, but also tough questions. Like Jill, Michael argues that Glaspell's play is an exemplary work of the humanities. He, however, calls attention to the play's refusal to offer an easy answer. It isn't black and white. He creates a, quote, moral dilemma that prompts, quote, tough questions. Should we or should we not sympathize with a mistreated person who's killed another, or even hope, should we or should we not, that she gets a second chance? Note Aaron's pithy formulation of the play's central conflict. Quote, the play explores the concepts of lawfulness represented by the men versus morality represented by the women when the two don't correspond. And I think when the two don't correspond, we have a difficult situation and we have a tough question, as well as an important question. Therese agrees. The play ends unresolved, making you decide for yourself what happens after the play ends. We're not told by Glaspell, what should happen. We don't even know what does happen. I think as Teresa's very nicely noted, question or comment rather. It must be noted, Aaron, I think would disagree. We do know what happens. The women offer nothing to correct the confidently foolish men, right? Thereby using their own condescension, the condescension of the men, against them, against the men. And you get this. I mean, they are not really acting at the end. It's kind of curious that, that there's not like a lot of action taken by the women at the end of the play to secure a certain outcome. It's more as though they just kind of go along with what the men tell them to do. And as it turns out, what the men tell them to do secures a certain outcome that they would prefer, which I think, according to Aaron's formulation, would be the moral as opposed to the lawful outcome. But back to the should. As Therese says, quote, the reader is forced to become one of the people in the cabin. I thought that was nice. And it was also meant to be a judge. Rebecca, who wrote about Antigone, finds much of the same in the old Greek play. We, the readers, we have to be the judges. We have to weigh both sides and determine, arrive at a determination, if Antigone and Creon are in the right or the wrong. Does one's determination, one's judgment, depend on one's point of view? Tiffany, hearkening to the Norton editor's point about points of view, and also their point about conundrums, does a great job of distinguishing the POVs, as I'll call them. We see things from, quote, the murderer's POV when she sits calmly describing the events of her husband's death, from the wife's point of view as they are being laughed at by their husbands for their womanly pleasures of sewing and cooking, and vaguely from the men's perspective, condescending and overbearing when they interrogated the women for evidence. We're very close to that, the Norton's editor's sense of this, quote unquote, human conundrum, this human conundrum that is created by the best literature, the greatest works of the humanities. Are we not locked into our own silos, our own point of views? We're not far from that question when we study this play of points of view against one another to which Tiffany has called our attention. The question arises, how do we escape from these points of view into which we seem to be locked, these silos, right? How do we join them, expand them, complement them? Or is that even impossible? Is that the point of the play, that we only have two eyes? We don't have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 eyes. We're locked into our perspectives. And you can see how close we are to this Norton sense of the conundrum, which I don't think is at odds with what Levinson was saying, or even what was being said by Matthew Arnold. I'll have something more to say about him. I will have something to say about him soon, right? So this conundrum, I wanted to mention, it's one that we run into when we get to later literature of the semester, modern and modernist literature that we're going to run into later in the semester. Nicely bringing in Levinson, Chris in his second entry nominates empathy as a candidate for the solution to conflicting point of views in the moral conundrum thereby created. Feeling for and as each other will help us bridge between our separate selves. About to make a little move into the more political considerations of the play that were offered by a number of you, but while we're still in this business about the conundrum, solving the conundrum, maybe coming up with some sort of tentative solution to the conundrum by the end of the play, you can see how this would be something that was being done by this play, Trifles, but it's from another angle. The play is doing something very different and something a little bit more, less sort of philosophical, okay, more political. So let's continue. In Chris's first, in his first entry, he accepts Tiffany's sense of the play of point of views, only then to suggest that Glaspell's aim in so playing these point of views off against each other is not to make the epistemological point, don't worry about that word, the sort of more philosophical point I just formulated, but, bringing us past conundrums, right, and turning political, to bring out the patriarchal quality of the society. And this was something that occupied a number of your responses, your answers/responses, as well as comments on the answers and responses of others, right? Formulated here, quote, would the sheriff and the attorney have been as diligent or thorough in finding out the truth if it had been Mr. Wright who killed his wife? More than one of you wonders that, rather than the other way around. Carly agrees, wondering whether the men, had Mr. W. been the suspected bad actor, might even have tried to defend Mr. Wright's actions. Jill, too, quote, didn't feel that the men were diligent in understanding why the murder occurred, but instead were going through the motions of investigation. Men or women are treated in different ways by men and women, Glassbell seems to be saying, especially by men. And the play, in representing this fact of our social condition or conditions, draws a, as one of you says, Joanna says, draws, quote, a line between the women and the men. So we have a political conflict here. And the author's taking sides and encouraging us to take sides, okay? This is what I saw as a central kind of, discontinuity in your responses, which just suggests how rich the play is, right? And again, I mean, just to highlight it here, this distinction between a political reading of the play and a more philosophical reading of the play strikes me as a really contributing to a sense of a debate that we might have that could continue. If we were going to have a in-person discussion, this would be the moment where we'd have that debate, and we're not. So we're going to have to leave it at this for now. But maybe it's a debate that can continue in a paper that you might want to write, okay? Like in the first squib or whatnot, which I'll be talking about pretty soon. So to give Michael the last word, as he says in the final post to the thread, appropriately, quote, the debate will go on. Typically, my comments on your discussion board contributions will be a little bit more like these paragraphs that follow here, a little more selective. Very important for you to understand this, that you should not feel slighted if your contribution is not mentioned some particular week. I explain this in that next sentence, right? So I'll let you read through that. I mean, I've got all kinds of little ambitions here, there, and the other place that have to do with specific points that I think need to be made. And often I will be very selective on the basis of these issues that have to be discussed for that particular week. So don't feel slighted. Should you not be mentioned, you will be mentioned. If not that week, probably the next week, right? Now, moving on to other items. For example, another one of the items that we have, in the discussion board, Carly in the Humanities Change Lives, Carly writes, Levinson tells us that the humanities teach us patience, thoroughness, close attention, multiple perspectives, and honest self-questioning. Sarah, as if following up, notes what would appear to be the end product, sought by way of the exercise of all those intellectual virtues of patience, thoroughness, and the rest. Quote, one of the many things that Levinson says humanities gives us is, quote, context for our actions. And a lot of you paid close attention to this language, this business of context, which perhaps may be defined as larger understandings and explanations, deeper justifications, right? Coherent perspectives, ones we accept only after much, yeah, you guessed it, patience, thoroughness, close attention, the entertaining and exploration of multiple perspectives, and a lot of honest self-questioning. So we feel that whatever explanation we have come up with, arrived at, is authentic and sound. But Sarah then plunges us into one of the central questions readers have had when making sense of the play, what to make of Antigone herself, her motives, her, quote, actions. Here's Sarah. Antigone is a symbol of what the humanities bring to, well, humanity. I think that's so well said. And Caitlin has a similar notion that in Antigone we have a person who, an exemplary humanist, devotee of the humanities, resists being, quote, lost in space and time, unsure of before and after, unclear about near and far. All of those things would fall to her, she herself says, more or less, on a couple of occasions, if she did not oppose the will of the king, of Creon, or Crayon, actually, is how that's pronounced, just like the Crayola writing instrument, right? Nicely said, but as Antigone, I want to ask both Sarah and Caitlin, do you think, quote, honestly self-questioning? Joanna, for example, finds her a negative example of such. She's the opposite of that. Not that she's dishonest, but there's not a lot of questioning of her own perspective going on. Do you find her patient? She's thorough, certainly, as Carly says, burying the body twice, but does she try to leave her own perspective and entertain multiple ones? Next week, you'll be reading some criticism on the play, and give you a little foretaste of that here. This is the critic who actually teaches down the road from us at the University of Chicago, Martha Nussbaum, who's a philosopher who loves literature. Quote, I want to suggest that Antigone, like Crayon, has engaged in ruthless simplification of the world of value, which effectively eliminates conflicting obligations. And I'll let you kind of gnaw on that claim of Nussbaum's on your own time, but I mean, you get the idea here that she's putting Antigone and Creon is kind of matched up pretty well, both of whom have, as Nick would say, an unwavering belief. Is it even a virtue, that sort of thoroughness? Jancy Monique notes, and I thought she nailed this with that wonderful term, it's a term that we all use, right? And there's nothing too mysterious about it. Creon is just daggone stubborn, right? It's almost pathological in the case of Creon. For Nussbaum, though, you see the claim here. We need to resist the temptation most of us will have simply to side with Antigone against the apparent tyrant, thereby missing her stubbornness, her equivalent stubbornness. And I will confess that that's my own temptation. I note that many of you feel it too. Jason, right? She becomes a martyr for her cause. Jason notes this apparently approvingly, to defy tyranny, right? It's a good cause. Tiffany, stopping short of endorsing the cause, quote, to break the chain of oppression and violence of Creon's royal law, as Chris puts it, stopping short of endorsing the cause itself asserts that whatever the cause, she accepts its consequences, the consequences of her own, bravely accepts the consequences of her own devotion to that cause. As Carly says, she's lion-hearted. We can find her heroic. These two would seem to suggest, well, especially, I think, Tiffany, we can find her heroic without endorsing her position with regard to the larger question, right, of laws versus, well, what does she represent, right? Is it just that, defiance of unjust, oppressive, tyrannical law, or does she not represent, as some of you, I think, come very close to saying, and I think even do say, divinely sanctioned, something that transcends political affairs and matters of state, divinely sanctioned honor, as Jason would have it, her larger or deeper context, her profound reason, in that nice phrase of Reese's, is that of God's ordinances, the divine once again. God's ordinances is a phrase that we owe to Ellen. I like Maria's sense that Antigone is a heroine of, quote, conviction and lucidity. She has clear grounds for her actions. She clearly articulated these grounds, and she acts decisively. But I also like Azariah's implied sense that Antigone alone may not be a proper heroine of the humanities because she lacks the good and necessary thing that her sister Ismene has, patience. I didn't see anybody saying that she was patient. You can see how the play becomes more of a conundrum, more of an honest self-questioning of apparently obvious values. Humans and humanists question things, as Michael says. This is what it means to be a work of humanities, right? To the extent that this happens, right? The play becomes more of a conundrum, more of the kind of thing that engages, or rather prompts in us, honest self-questioning. To the extent that Antigone's own actions and character come into play, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if we just take her as the heroine beyond any doubt and without flaw, I think the play gets a lot less interesting at that point, right? When worthiness itself is the issue, when how we define worthiness, as Lindsay would say, also wisdom, morality, and honor in addition to worthiness. I think we get approaching a little closer to the play as an exemplary work of humanities, of the humanities, which is to say, an example, a great example of a quote-unquote the human conundrum. Now, for folks who discuss trifles instead of Antigone, they had things very similar to say, and it was a much briefer, much shorter thread. So I'm just going to quote a few of these nice things being said by some of you. Dana, for example, in Levinson's article, Levinson states that we all need to compare ourselves to others. And Chris, quoting the same bit from Levinson, we all need to compare ourselves to others. We need context for our actions. Chris notes how the failure to compare dooms the men in their investigations. They don't compare themselves to the women. They don't make common cause with the women, right? They condescend to the women, and they don't put themselves in the position of the women. They don't put themselves in the position of, as the women do, they don't put themselves in the position of Minnie, of the wife, of Mrs. Wright, right? And they'd be a lot better off in their investigations, both legal and moral, right? As Chris says, if the men in the play put themselves in a woman's shoes and didn't have a sexist attitude, they might understand what could drive a lonely woman, such as Mrs. Wright, to strangle her husband. They would also, of course, be more successful investigators, right? Because the women who do put themselves in a woman's shoes, being themselves women, though, there's a strong suggestion in this play that the women would be better at putting themselves in men's shoes much better than the men are at putting themselves in women's shoes. Maybe even better, and this gets interesting. Are the women better at putting themselves in men's shoes than the men are at putting themselves in other men's shoes? And this really becomes a critique of patriarchy, does it not? Monica points to the need, finally, for all those intellectual virtues Levinson names if we're to indeed construct a good context. Quote, I believe the play elaborates on the idea to not judge a book by its cover. It implies that there's a story behind another story. But I know you're wondering, how does that old Victorian Matthew Arnold fit in? We've done a lot with Levinson, right? And well, also with the Norton editors. But hey, this video has gone on a while, so not now.
Aqui saiu, locais para filho fane, viva do broteram paus, e mortes poder. Odisseas, almeias método, viveram e com molhuça, com lecas, as vozes nevada, foda massagia, cigana pródromo, oxigênio.